I thought you were on a journey.
I was.
Did you find what you were looking for?
We need to talk about Martin. But first, let's start talking about what we actually know about Martin. And then at the end of the video, I will explore all of the options we have on who Martin really is. Something is not right here. Something's not adding up. This scene was not what it seems to be at face value. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more From Theories. A quick rant that I usually keep at the end of the video. So if you're not interested and you just want to hear the theory about Martin, timestamps are on this video and you can skip ahead about 3 minutes. I want to express very clearly on this channel that every theory I've ever come up with could be wrong. Every theory on my channel is just that. It's a theory. The show is not done. The show has no predecessor, no book that it was created on, nothing like that. So none of us actually know how this story is going to end. The point of a channel like mine is to guess. The point of a channel like mine is to use the details we do know and to use the dialogue, the canon, and everything that I've personally caught to try to guess. Now, I've guessed right and I've guessed wrong, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I get a lot of comments that kind of go along the lines of thinking that I think I need to be right. Also, too, my channel's only a month old. So I get a lot of comments from people. Number one, some people mentioning a lot of theories I have that I've already covered on this channel. Number two, I get a lot of people commenting theories I haven't covered on this channel, and it's simply because the type of content I'm creating is based off of an order of relevance, right? I'm not just out here posting random videos and only posting every theory I've ever come up with. I have so many theories I've never even talked about. So many things I've caught that I have not even mentioned in a video yet because it's in order of relevance on what the community is looking for, what we're talking about. The show was out, and so when the episodes came out, those took priority. So I don't want anyone to think, one, that I've ever talked about every theory that I know, two, that I've ever talked about every detail that I've caught, and three, that I don't feel like I can be wrong. That's been a huge misconception in my comment section, as well as the fact that, again, I'm a new channel and I've noticed that people are accrediting theories that aren't mine to my channel that are wrong, right? And they're using it to be mad at my content and act like I've always been wrong. Number one, I never said the numbers were coordinates. I was actually one of the biggest persons that was like hoping that they were not coordinates and that they were not addresses. And I proved in my own videos that they weren't. So again, there's been a lot of confusion in my comments that I'm trying to keep up with. There's been a lot of questions in my comments that I'm trying to keep up with, and a lot of theories also, and other people's theories also that I'm trying to keep up with. But again, I'm a new channel, so I have not yet talked about everything I will talk about on the show. I have not put out every theory I have on the show, and every theory I have could be wrong, and I'm okay with that. I need us to also understand this. I can have an opinion and a critique on a show that I love. Those things are not exclusive to one another. So when I'm talking about things that I notice that are just little plot holes are normal. Plot holes are in most shows, most TV shows. Some of the greatest shows and movies have plot holes, right? Obviously, some of the greatest don't have them, right? Some of the greatest are very well planned. Some of the greatest have been written since the beginning, which this show is not one of those. All the other theories you see on the show, people coming up with some of the craziest things you've ever heard, because for all we know, anybody could be right. So with that being said, let's talk about Martin, because he's been one of the biggest topics in my comment section. Now, I've mentioned this in a couple other videos on what I potentially think Martin could or could not be. With every new detail we've gotten, every new plot point we've gotten, every new episode we've gotten, and every new season, we seem to be getting a lot more questions when it comes to From, and Martin is no exception. There are so many theories and questions about Martin as a character that are out there, so I want to explore what we do know about Martin based on the canon. Starting off with when we first encounter him. We know that Boyd was in the forest looking for more answers. It was one of the first times he went even deeper into the forest than he ever has. Again, context for how we came across Martin is important. They're in the middle of the forest. A storm has already came. As we now know, based off of the man in yellow, all of this was in response to Tabitha and Jim trying to find more answers. Tabitha dug that hole in the ground. Jim was putting up that radio, and now Boyd is in the forest doing the exact same thing. This was a huge canon event that happened in the show to explain how the town would react to someone looking for more answers. Knowledge comes at a cost. Context is important. We know Boyd and Sara are in the forest and they're struggling. It is raining. They cannot get away. And that is when the boy in white shows up to save the day. He points out the faraway tree and tells them to go in it. They will be safe there. Now, I have a lot of questions about this because as we now know, and I'll do a separate video on the boy in white, he is not this all-knowing, future-telling character that he has been perceived to be when we first met him in season 1. As we now know in season 3, he's almost just as much in the dark as anybody else is in the town. Yes, he knows how the town was created. Yes, he knows the story behind the town, and we can assume that he somehow knows the answer to defeating this quest, but at the same time, he is just like anyone else and any other entity in the town, just like the other children in the town, which is a little bit of a foreshadow, that he is just reacting to the things he's seeing, and he's trying to help and protect the people and be a good spirit in the town. But he is not actually in control. That is important to understand about when he tells them they will be safe in the tree and they end up not being safe. Sara ends up back in town, but we can assume that's what happened, right? We don't actually know what happened when Sara got out of that tree, which I think there might be more to that. But Boyd did not end up being safe. He ends up in a chimney in the ground. This all matters for when we lead up to meeting Martin, because why did the tree send Boyd into this chimney? Victor has also explained how these faraway trees are not predictable. They will send you almost pretty much anywhere. Now, we have tried to come up with a pattern to these faraway trees as a community, as a family, on what is going on with the faraway trees, who or what controls them. But I think to an extent, they're actually not as controlled or predictable or a pattern to it as we might think. And now this is when we first encounter Martin. A couple things I want to point out specifically about this initial scene when Boyd is still in the chimney. Number one, we never saw what was above the chimney the entire time until Martin said something. I wanted to point that out because there's no way to know if that lighting that was above the chimney that was going into the chimney into the ground was always there since when Boyd got into the chimney. Keep in mind, we did not know what the view from the chimney actually looked like until Martin said something. Now, Martin initially says, "Are you real?" This is a really important detail. It's almost kind of similar to like what we're seeing right now happen in Silo, which will be another show I'm starting to decide if I will cover. It's similar to Solo in the Silo. Are you real? Has he been hearing people who are not real? Has there been entities who are messing with him to make him question if a voice from the chimney or the cellar is a real person? Something I wanted to point out, if Martin truly is just another person. After he asks him, "Are you real?" he doesn't hesitate to ask. The first thing he says, "I can help you. I can help you if you help me. Do you promise?" Now, I do not believe that it is a coincidence that this is structured to sound similar to how we've seen everyone else in town fall for an entity that promises to help them or to help everyone in exchange for something. I do not believe that is a coincidence, and I want to point that out. As we get more dialogue, we know that based off of the timing of what Martin is saying to Boyd in this moment to get him out of the chimney aligns with what we later see with Julie talking to Martin as well. So those gaps have always been there. That's crucial to also point out. Another point of these writers may have actually had this show planned out, but we'll get there. As this goes on, he gets the rope and he gets out of the chimney. But I want to point out that there is another scene that happens right here where Boyd sees Ellis at the bottom of the chimney and he's talking about, "Hey, do you want to take the boat out for another ride?" And Ellis has the key. Now, this scene is a lot more important than people realize. I mentioned in a past video how there's a clear pattern of whatever is in charge of Fromville or whatever is listening and controlling some of these visions seems to know things that people have explicitly said or referred to or done in out loud, outside, in a visible sense in the town, but it cannot read your mind. It only knows what you have verbally said or physically done within Fromville. And a lot of people pointed to this specific scene saying that, okay, well then how does the entity actually know about the boat? Versus when we see in season 3 and the entity is taunting Boyd and it prints that picture with Elgin, there is no boat in the picture. Well, this scene actually only confirms what I was saying, because Boyd in earlier season 1 pulls that key out of his drawer and he looks at it. So in theory, the entity would have seen the key, which Ellis is talking about, and knows that there was a boat, and in some weird way assume that there was some memory of Ellis and Boyd having used this boat. It does not know that Boyd and Ellis and Abby never actually physically saw the same boat, and the entity itself also does not know what the boat looks like. So it is another way for us to know that there's something watching and listening to everything that they say in the town, but is not necessarily able to read your mind. It shows him the key, but we have not yet seen the boat. Now, when it comes to what Ellis is actually saying and doing in this vision, this is something that clearly has never happened. Based off of what is happening in what Ellis is saying, this is something that would have happened if Boyd and Abby and Ellis had never seen the tree. So if they had never seen the tree and they made it to their home, their retirement home, and they had the boat, this is something that would have played out if that had happened. Now, the question is, why is this being seen? What is the point of this vision? Is it the entity playing with Boyd, but it's also playing with him on some, this is something that would happen if you had made it home, or this is something that would happen if you go home? But this scene specifically says a lot. It says, number one, the entity that is controlling everything and sending people visions can only use things it's physically seen, and then give you visions to play with whatever it's physically seen or heard you talk about. Number two, just simply a vision an entity is giving him to taunt him about what it would be like to go home, or if he had made it home. So as he gets out of this hole, we start to see who Martin is, and we see physically what is happening here. He physically appears to be someone who is stuck on the wall and chained to the wall, who is asking for help being free. We seem to be in some sort of form of an old version of a prison. As we talk, we now find out that Martin wants him to kill him. The question is, why? Why does he want to die? I have to add this question for you guys to think about also. Is he really a person? I think at first glance, it's easy to believe everything Martin is saying, and I'll continue to talk about this throughout the rest of the dialogue of this scene. But is he really a person, or is he an entity who needs to die in order to be freed from that current state? That is something you have to consider when we're watching this scene. It's interesting that he uses the words, "we had a deal." We've seen in this show already that multiple entities have used the form of a deal and exchanged one thing for another to get their way. Everything lies here. Everything is trying to manipulate us, to hurt us. Is Martin actually truly the same thing? Now, as we continue with the scene, Martin starts to talk about, are you from the town? I always thought the town was the worst part, and then I went through the tree, and he asked Boyd if he went through the tree. Now, this is obviously trying to get us to believe, oh, Martin was another resident that was in the town at some point, and he went through the tree. You go out one place, end up another. You can end up stuck. You can end up trapped. That's when they get you. Emphasis on they. Now, Martin is telling us a story that is easy to take at face value of the story of someone who's been where Boyd has been. So if Martin truly is a person, right, because that could 100% still be true, then this is him telling us that the only way to end up in this place like he did was to go through the tree and to go through the storyline, to be trapped by whatever entity is in control. We need to talk about they, because throughout the dialogue between Martin and Boyd, Martin never answers who they are. But it's not in the natural, normal way you see a scene like this play out, where someone is hysterical, they just want to get out, they just want to break free, they just want to die, and they're just like falling apart, and they're not answering the questions to get the answers that we need. He specifically, calmly, and intentionally avoids these answers, and he usually avoids these answers by giving Boyd compliments. That is a very, very important thing to acknowledge. This specifically is a manipulation tactic. But why would he need to manipulate Boyd out of asking who they are if he himself was not they? He never answers the questions of who they are when Boyd asks, who's coming when Boyd asks, or when Boyd asks who did this to you, who comes to get you. He never answers a single one of those questions. He also goes on to say things that would make you put your guard down. You have a kind face. I haven't experienced kindness in a while. So it gives you, is he truly a nice person? Is he truly this nice person from the past? Or is this some sort of manipulation tactic to get Boyd to let his guard down? Because after this, what happens? Boyd starts trying to free him. He comes close to him, which gives him the opportunity to do what? Give Boyd the worms. He mentions later on, you think these things come out at night that did this? They are just the tip of the spear. Now, this is a very leveled piece of dialogue here, because number one, those things out there in the forest, as smart, as intentional as we know that they are, they're still not as powerful enough to do what they've done to Martin. And he literally says just the tip of the spear. This is a military term. This is something that has been used in the military specifically to denote that there's levels to an attack. Now, this is confirmation in canon and in dialogue that there are levels to the entities in From, that there are the henchmen, the higher level soldiers, then we would get to generals, and then the head boss in charge. This is confirmation right here that exists in Fromville. So it's not just us figuring it out anymore. This is confirmation. That's when the music starts. There's darkness in the forest, Martin says, things you can't even begin to imagine, things we were never meant to see. I thought that was very intentional dialogue as well, because we've seen a lot of people talk about things that we need to see, things that we're going to see, right? Specifically with Jim in his earlier conversations in the season. There's something we have not seen yet, something that will answer everything. The reverse of that, the dark side of that same conversation, where it's things we were never meant to see that are now going to harm us in the end. Now let's talk about the music. Is this music a countdown for the entity, a way to summon this type of entity, right? Who started the music box so that it would play when Boyd was in the cellar? We need to get out before the music stops. Again, insinuating that once the music stops, once the melody stops, that is when the entity will come for you. This is what's really going to throw Martin off for you guys. Martin then says, "You ever wonder if Abby was right?" This was a clear switch, even in the tone of his voice. This was the first sign to me that something was not right about Martin. As soon as Boyd got close enough, as soon as Boyd trusted him, just like we did as viewers, he switched his tone. He gave up information that does not make sense. If you did not know who Boyd was, because I've seen a lot of people ride on this detail, if you did not know who Boyd was and you had to ask him his name, how would you then know that Boyd even knows Abby? That is the first situation right there where all of us should have caught Martin is not who he is pretending to be. How would he even know that Abby knows Boyd if he did not actually know who Boyd was? Then on top of that, he also knows what Abby said. He says, "Do you ever wonder if Abby was right? Do you think this was all a dream?" Now, these are two very clear details that tell us that Martin is probably an entity, that Martin knows who Abby was. Martin knows what Abby did. Martin knows what Abby said to Boyd in that moment, yet he was not there. So to me, this is very clear that something's not right about Martin. He either was there that day somehow and he knew who Boyd was and he knew who Abby was, or it's completely the opposite. He was not there, but he is an entity in the town, because we know that entities in the town know everyone by name and have known everything that they've said and done. As soon as Boyd is like, what did you say? And is like starting to come across of like, what are you talking about? He then pretends to be in distress. He then pretends that he needs help to get Boyd to do what he needs him to do. That is when Boyd sees the worms, but it is already too late. It is already too late. He's already holding Martin, and it's too late for him to get away. Now, nothing actually comes when the music stops. I want to point that out because to me, this means that whatever was supposed to be coming was already here. Now, this is now when he is free and the cuffs are off and he says, we are out of time. And he says, my blood is your blood now. He easily slices Boyd's arm up in the same place he personally has a scar on his body and gives him the my blood is your blood now. To me, it's giving that was the intention all along. He manipulated Boyd. He probably projected himself as a physical and visual representation of somebody who was trapped in this dungeon, but he himself was the entity the entire time. He was the thing to be afraid of. That is just my opinion. However, he could still also in this concept, in all of this dialogue, just be a person from the past who was stuck, and then he knew that the only way to set himself free at least would be to give Boyd the worm so that he could die. That is also possible too. Now, the last couple things I want to point out about this scene canonically is, number one, Boyd walks out of the dungeon and he appears to be outside of the ruins, just like we see Julie do when she goes in the ruins, has her coma, and comes out. Is this a hint or the first hint at that anyone who is tied to this dungeon in some way can story walk? Was Boyd able to story walk through the tree, and Julie is able to story walk because she is one of the chosen three who is connected to this dungeon? Now, another canonical instance where we might be able to point out that Martin was not who he appeared to be. When Boyd, Sara, and Kenny go back to the ruins, she starts off by freaking out. She hears the music box. Now, number one, I want to point out that the music box is still playing. Is this not counterintuitive to what Martin said? They come when the music stops. So if we are to assume that we need to stop the music to get rid of this entity, how are these two things happening at the same time? The music stops to bring the entity, but in order to stop the entity, you got to stop the music. So again, I want us to think about, is this because Martin is not telling the truth? Then we go to, she says, it's laughing at you for bringing it back to town, for setting it free. Well, who did Boyd actually set free? He set Martin free. And you could also insinuate that this meant by the transformation the worms went through when they turned into the cicadas. But I believe it's actually talking about setting Martin free. Martin is who gave him the worms that went back to town. So he is the reason Boyd was able to bring this entity to town. What we think was a positive, like I've seen a lot of people twist and turn into thinking that the worms helped them kill Smiley and the worms helped them figure anything out, was always actually a negative. It was always a setup. Smiley is alive again anyways. It was a setup. Giving Boyd the worms didn't help anyone. And it was all manipulation. The last thing I want to talk about is Martin's second scene, when we see him in Julie's dream. How does he know Julie? I do not believe this is as simple as being explained because Julie story walked at another point and went to different paths where Martin would know who she is. I believe that this ties more back to something we've known the entire time based off of the canon dialogue. Every single entity in Fromville knows every single one of the residents by name. That is something we have known since literally season 1 that was explained to us. They know everyone by name. We saw this when they killed Trudy. They told us this. So only entities so far in From know who people are by name without having met them before, and also know what was said outside of their physical presence. This is something we have to understand about the entire show. Now I want to talk about some details that connect some dots outside of the canon that exist in this scene. Number one, the dungeon cuffs. I went through a whole, I do my little crazy deep dives and research to try to figure some stuff out. I figured out that I was able to date the type of cuff that is being used to hold Martin to the 18th century. They are called Derby cuffs, which were used in America in the mid 1800s. The UMC tattoo that Martin has is not simply a Marine logo tattoo. It's specifically the logo that the Marine Corps had during the 18th century, specifically around 1840 to 1868. Now, the mistake people are making is that they are using that to align Martin with the 1864 timeline in the cycle that we know of, according to the dates in the lighthouse. But I'm about to tell you two other facts we know from this scene that throw a red herring in that entire theory. Semper Fi, the actual slogan for the Marines, was not introduced to the Marine Corps until 1883. How someone who is in a place that is dated to the 18th century but knows a slogan in the Marines that he was a part of dated to the late 18th century. And then I'll add this. Martin says he's from Millbrook. I was able to pin down that the most famous Millbrook that we know of, a small town named Millbrook, is Millbrook, New York. It was not established as a town in America until 1895, and it was not called Millbrook until 1895. So through what I found, as well as other things people have found, Martin is not only someone who was potentially alive during the 1864 Civil War cycle, but he outlived it in the real world past 1883, which happens to be another date in the lighthouse. And I do not think that's a coincidence. And then also lived in a town that must put him at least closer to the next date we know, which is 1931. He cannot be in Fromville and know all these things about the real world. He simply would have missed them all. So that to me starts to scream something is not right here. So to me, whichever one you believe, whether he's an actual person or a resident from the town, he's a regular person, or if he's an entity, there's some type of time loop, time travel thing going on here. He's way too old to be alive type thing happening here. So now that we've established everything that I found based off of what we know, let's talk about what this means. So the question is, who is Martin? Number one, I've seen all the theories on Martin being Randall. I've seen it all. It's kind of similar to what I was thinking too. Like, people think Randall is Martin. People think Randall is the man in yellow. I think us as a community need to start relaxing on thinking that we've seen everybody we're ever going to meet in the show and that everybody in the town is somebody else. Too many theories are coming out of that concept of us wanting to believe that every single person in the town is a reincarnation or another version of another person. And it's simply not going to work for every character. And Randall is one of those people. He doesn't have the tattoo. And based off of the details of Martin that date him to a certain point, it would not make sense. The other thing I want to debunk about the Randall being Martin theory is that a lot of people think it's because Randall potentially was in the same spot Martin was in when they were locked up in the dungeon. However, this is debunked by visions we see of the three cicada chosen people locked up in the dungeon. Randall is actually on the wall where there is a body missing, not on the wall where Martin was. So that again is not proof that Martin and Randall are the same person. Randall being the man in yellow, because I got a lot of comments on that in my last video, was simply because the painting of the original man in yellow had some interesting details that made you think that maybe there was a scar on the man in yellow's face that was in the painting. That scar is not on the man in yellow that we got, number one. Similar to how I pointed out that there's a lot of details about the painting of the man in yellow that is not what we got. I want to reference a quote from one of the writers. So shout out to the man in black who does watch my videos on here, that based on a Ricky He interview by the movie blog, the man in yellow was inspired by a character John Griffin ran into LA. He first saw this man in yellow in a suit filled with the joy thought of him as an angel. Sounds familiar to the dialogue, doesn't it? Then a few years later, he happened to see the man again, and his suit was run down and seemed ragged. That was his inspiration of the character per Ricky. So it matches everything I've already said also in my videos, that the very clear painting of the man in yellow originally is clearly a younger version of the man in yellow we actually see in the show. Was the man in yellow a past resident, similar to how Martin could actually be a past resident and be an entity at the same time. I'm telling you, there's a connection here, right? Now, when I start talking about all of these timelines in the show, a lot of people get lost because they probably have not seen my landmark theory video, which I'm going to make a much more in-depth video on all of the timelines right after this one. But my landmark theory is basically that all of the numbers we saw in the lighthouse specifically, not the numbers in the tree, because they're actually not the same numbers. All the numbers in the lighthouse specifically actually are years, and they are dates, and they are the years and the dates from every cycle we see playing out in the town. If you took a snapshot in time from this date, what would that look like? So that's what I mean in my videos when I say that 1506, which is the first date in the lighthouse, is where this all began. Because you take a snapshot of America in 1506, it was early settlement, caves, rock cairns, Native Americans, European settlers who were Christian and not Christian, and stories about entities that would come out at night and hunt people, various different kinds, of course, that were across all types of different cultures. A lot of those mythologies had strong roots to the types of cultures and civilizations present in this century. You go jump ahead 1609. A snapshot of time in 1609 in America would give you pilgrims, would give you a village that looks like the village we see in Fromville. Jump ahead to 1700s would give you the Quaker Church. Jump ahead, you start to see where I'm going with this, right? That is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about my landmark theory, which I'm going to make a much more in-depth video for you guys so you guys can truly understand everything that I've caught and all the things we now know, because I dropped that video before season 3 was over. So there's new information to add to it. If Martin is truly a resident from the past, from a previous cycle in Fromville, put on your big brains for this one because it made my brain hurt trying to figure this out and explain it. If Martin was truly a past resident who was stuck in the town and had been gotten by the cicadas, how did he know what the town was? Because based off my landmark theory, that means that all the buildings in the town, from the motel pool to the houses that are very clearly reminiscent of what Victor's house looked like in the 70s in real life, if they're all tied to the 1978 cycle, how was the town already there? How was the town there since Martin's been here? And here's my answer for you, because that answer has always been in the show. Rewind to the cave painting, where I told you guys in my landmark theory video that the reason this cave painting starts to actually tell us that time travel is somewhere involved is because the lighthouse is in the cave painting. There is no lighthouse that exists in America in 1506. They didn't come to America until the 17th century. So how would the original settlers of this town who ended up in Fromville have seen a lighthouse? That to me tells me a deeper story here, because now we have two different canon conversations based off dialogue that confirm these buildings in Fromville have always been here. Now try to keep with me because it might make your brain hurt with this part. Regardless of the cycle that is happening in Fromville from 1506 to 1978 and all of the other 8 cycles in between, again, I want to point that out, that we have 9 years in the lighthouse. Every single building that is still a snapshot in time always existed in Fromville. So that means that from 1506, Fromville still actually knew what towns and houses and motels would look like in 1978. And every single thing we're seeing in Fromville was already there. I know it's hard to wrap your head around. You might disagree with me, but I believe that this is where that's heading. And that symbol everyone's talking about in the cave with the infinity symbol with the line through it is really what that means. It is a infinite cycle of things happening in existence with a line through them where they connect, and that it's always been here. It's a cycle that predicts itself, that there's things happening in Fromville that are always meant to happen. It goes back to Jade and the predestination theory about, he said that because Tabitha was having these dreams when she was younger, she was always going to end up here. There was nothing she could do. She was predestined to be here, just like everything and everyone else in Fromville is predestined to be here. And some of the physical versions of these things have always been in this pocket dimension that I believe a lot of people are right about, even though it's based off of time cycles, exists outside of time. So yeah, try to keep up with that thought process. It's a lot. We are getting what I believe is a very similar story to what we've seen in Dark. It is a very complicated time travel cultural story. If Martin is actually a past resident in the town, this would explain everything that he knows. It would also explain how he knows who the town is or what the town is, but yet he has been here since before. Because if you think Martin currently is an actual person in the town, if you think he is actually a past resident in the town who was taken by the cicadas, similar to how we've seen the Chosen Three in the current timeline, he then could potentially be the body in the cellar. Remember in my past video, I was able to date and link the cellar through the light fixtures, through the peach cans and everything else, and just American history to 1931. And based off of all my evidence in this video, that means Martin himself would have been a town member around the 1931 cycle. But that still does not explain one large piece, which is that how does Martin know Abby and know what Abby said? Is he actually an entity? The question becomes, is he the actual cicada monster? Is he the monster that is in control of what is going on around this dungeon and everything that's connected to it? Don't forget the context you see things in when you saw them. Again, I pointed out at the beginning of this video, the context of which we saw Boyd enter into the chimney. As we know, every time they look for answers, every time they go into the forest specifically and they come back with something that helps them and tells us more about what is going on in the town, it is linked to an entity that is not good. The cost always seems to be a new entity in exchange for more of the story and more knowledge. I believe that Martin himself was the physical representation of what they were exchanging. The worms and the cicadas are a negative. Boyd getting the worms and the cicadas from Martin is a negative. This is something that we know for a fact. So us thinking that anything that has to do with these ruins is a positive is us not actually seeing the underlying tone of what was happening in context when we were watching the show in real time. Everything that happened at exchange for everything else everyone did was a negative, and Martin and the cicadas are not an exclusion to that. Why would he know what he knows? Because there's certain things he should not know. Why would he give Boyd the worms? I believe it goes back to everything we're seeing in the show. Everything here lies. Everything here wants to hurt us. The easiest explanation is usually the correct one. And with all of the things about Martin, that even with my theory on what could be potentially happening if he was a resident in the landmark theory, there's still too many things that you cannot explain about Martin knowing and talking about and having and seeing and his current presence in this timeline. I believe that he is an entity similar to the man in yellow who was at some point an actual person or resident in the town, similar to the first monsters we've ever seen in the origin story that we now know that all of those monsters as well were past residents in the town. I believe that this is all connected, and I believe Martin is no different, and he is simply not as innocent as a lot of us would like to believe. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. A lot of you guys watch my videos all the time, but you're not subscribed. So please subscribe to my video. We're so close to almost 10,000 subscribers, which is crazy. And I hope you guys really enjoyed this breakdown. I have many, many, many more to do, which is why I believe that even though I am looking into potentially breaking down Silo, I might just stick to From up until From is done, because there are so many things to talk about. There are so many things I need to cover because I am a new channel, and I am going to do my season 1 and season 2 rewatch series. So keep that in mind. Hit subscribe, turn on noties for those notifications, and I will see you guys in the next video.